Okay. Cool. Oh, perfect. It's in here.
Where's Tony?
Oh, I said, told you.
No.
Anthony, he's on Zoom. He's probably at home.
Like, is he actually here online or?
He's on Zoom, yeah. You want to say
Tell
hi?
him tell him Dr. Bucher's here.
Oh, are you Dr. Bucher?
I am.
Oh.
Hi, Dr. Bucher.
Yep.
He's too good. How's it going, Tony?
What'd you say?
How's it going?
Pretty good. How are you doing?
Doing all right.
Good, good.
Nice.
So, second board, please.
All right. All right, guys, welcome to the second meeting for Superweather Club this semester. Today is a very special day. We have Tim Marshall presenting for us. I don't want to take up too much of his time, so I'll just leave it to you.
All right. Hello, everybody. How you doing?
Good.
Okay. It's a lot cooler there than it is here. It's been over 100 degrees practically every day for the last 3.5 months. As you may or may not know, I went to NIU in DeKalb and then moved down here to Texas to escape those cold winters. And instead, I got into a furnace. So I wish I was back up there. So I guess share screen, huh? See what happens
Yes.
here.
Perfect. We not see him.
So without dating myself too much, I was born and raised in Chicago, and in 1967, that's right, 1967, a tornado hit my town. It was Oak Lawn, which is the southwest suburb. And I was only about 9 years old at that time, and I saw tremendous destruction, the likes I could have never have imagined. What is this thing that comes out of the sky and does all this? And my mom and dad didn't know. So they said, why don't you go to the library and read everything you can on tornadoes? So I did. And I became fascinated with tornadoes. So much so that I decided to make it my career. So I came down after graduating NIU, I came down to Texas Tech in Lubbock to do some graduate work on tornadoes. And I was part of a tornado intercept program where we went out and filmed. Back in those days, we had filmed tornadoes at close range and studied them. And then the engineering department called over and asked me if I wanted to go to Grand Island and work with Fujita's group up there to survey damage. And I said, yeah. So I went up to Grand Island. I had met Fujita in the first time in the fall of 1974 when we had an AMS student meeting at the University of Chicago. So from there, I decided, well, I want to study tornadoes the rest of my life, but in more detail, I want to do it from an engineering point of view and look at the damage. And maybe we can get an idea of what the wind speeds are from the damage. I mean, we don't have an anemometer that'll survive. Doppler radar is iffy in terms of velocity. So I decided I was going to spend my career studying damage. That's what I did. So in about, everybody knows the F scale, the Fujita scale?
Yes.
Dr. Fujita? Okay. 0 to 5 rating. Yeah, so I've met Fujita several times. And in fact, the student, me, went to a lot of these AMS conferences and listened to Fujita. And then it was turnabout. because in the 1990s and 2000s, I gave lectures on tornadoes, and in the front row was Fujita. So it was amazing to see that. But he's been an inspiration to me. Of course, he's passed now. And in 2001, I was approached by my alma mater, Texas Tech, and they said, well, we would like you to serve as an expert to the enhanced Fujita scale, which was being developed at that time. And over a number of years, we worked together with other scientists and developed the enhanced Fujita scale. And in 2007, the National Weather Service adopted the enhanced Fujita scale as its way of assessing damage. They go out, they look at a building, they look at the fatal flaws of the building, they come up with a range of wind speeds that failed that building. So that was a phenomenal, addition. It's a little more detailed. If you go Google EF scale, you can get the PDF free, and you can review that. Well, then in about 2015, the American Society of Civil Engineers, in conjunction with the AMS, which is also in conjunction with the Structural Engineers Institute, said, hey, we should make this enhanced Fujita scale a standard, not only in the US, but look at it from a standpoint of international. And so this means that we went back, we looked at the EF scale, and now they want to really expand this thing. There were some controversies back in 2002 at La Plata being rated a F5 based on a house that was swept clean. But I looked at that house and it was not anchored. And so it was overrated, and they decided to come on down to F4, but it could have should have been F3. It was not that impressive. But anyways, that was one of the first things that threw a flag that we needed more detail on this, and we need some training. And then, of course, in 2013 with the El Reno event, Doppler radar reported over 200-mile-an-hour winds, and yet the damage was just not showing it. So we have to think about how are we going to deal with radar? How are we going to deal with in situ measurements like a mesonet site or something? How are we going to weigh that in with our assessment of damage? So in 2015, this project began to enhance the enhanced Fujita scale. And it has been a tremendous amount of labor. We have a committee, and instead of having 6 scientists like we did in 2001, we have 80 scientists. And if you can imagine, to try to get 80 people to agree on anything is impossible. So it's been a daunting task. What I thought was going to be only a 2-year project, hey, it's still going on. And maybe, just maybe, we'll have a draft of this thing by 2025. That's 10 years of work. We've had meetings. I've spent thousands of hours instead of hundreds. It's like writing a dissertation, for crying out loud. And I've written a lot of it, and you'll see a lot of it there when it comes out. And I'm hoping it gets published in the next couple of years. So what I want to talk about tonight is what are we doing now with enhancing the enhanced Fujita scale? That's more than what happened in 2007. So that's what this talk is about. And bear with me if you're not into tornadoes. Sorry, this webinar is about tornadoes and tornado damage. So the Enhanced Fujita Scale project, well, it was decided that there was a need to improve the Fujita scale or F scale. And this was back in the late 90s. Fujita passed in the early 90s. And Texas Tech engineers didn't want to attempt this while he was alive, although Fujita knew in his memoir that this is kind of where it was going to go, that there needed to be more research, more study done with this F scale. The project was funded by NIST, which is still funding it in a way, and it called for establishing a steering committee, and various F scale users were invited to meet and discuss revising it. Okay. So a meeting was held in 2001. I was there. 20 people attended. A group of developed what I call damage indicators, which are like house, barn, school. That's a damage indicator. And then degrees of damage associated with it, minor damage, major damage, it's gone, kind of thing. And the group agreed to preserve the historical database by keeping the enhanced Fujita scale to the 6 numbers, 0 to 5. And then 6 experts were selected out of the 20 to develop the wind speed ranges, and I was one of the 6. So here we go. You probably have seen this if you Googled and downloaded the enhanced Fujita scale. This is 28 damage indicators. They range from barns, DI1, to family residences, DI2, manufactured homes, and then a bunch of other building types. So each damage indicator has several degrees of damage, and the DODs range from no damage to total destruction. And of course, they're arranged in order of increasing damage. And so usually what we're talking about in terms of what wind speeds, it's a 3-second gust at 10 meters above the ground. And 10 meters is chosen because the standard anemometer height is 10 meters. So we established a range of failure wind speeds through what's called expert elicitation. It's some of that, our knowledge of buildings and how they are constructed and how they fail. And then the document was issued. So you've seen this if you've Googled that, downloaded this document. The most common DI, of course, is residence. So here we are with the residence. It has a degree of damages from 1 to 10, 10 being the most destructive. We have 3 columns here, EXP, which is the expected wind, failure wind, LB, which is a lower bound. If there's some sort of fatal flaw in the building that causes it to kind of collapse. And then we have UB, which is upper bound. And so you get to choose either column or somewhere in between, if you like, on what you think for this. So if you're missing a few shingles on the roof, it's expected to be about 65 miles an hour. If you're doing more damage than that, with gutters, awnings, vinyl, metal siding, 20% or less of the roof, it's 79 miles an hour. And if you're dealing with uplift of the roof or a partial uplift, it's 97 miles an hour. We do have 5 in here, which is a house shifts off its foundation, and that's because of so many problems with anchoring that we see, especially in the southeast. And then all the way up to 200, where it means that a well-constructed residence is gone. Well, what's a well-constructed residence? What does that mean? Well, we have to talk about that in the commentary, or at least that's what we're going to do here in the next version. So this is just a little bit of an explanation of both, of actually all 3, expected upper bound and lower bound. And then if you want to compare what the old EF scale was with this EF scale, you can see that in the lower bounds, not too much of a difference, but in the upper bound, the wind speeds are far less than in the old Fujita scale. And although they're a little different in terms of their baseline, the Fujita scale was based off of fastest 1/4 mile. This is a 3-second gust speed here for the EF. But you can see the wind speed ranges F5, 261 to 318, which is a 3-second gust of 262 to 317, so not much of a difference. But the new scale knocks down the wind speed considerably for EF5. Now, why? Well, it's been our experience you don't need a 300-mile-an-hour wind to knock down a house. Houses are built to a minimum code, and you've all taken tests, right? You've all taken exams. Do you study the night before to get the minimum? Probably not, but you hope to make it and pass. But unfortunately, that's not the way it is in the building community. Their goal is the minimum because of economics. If you build a house too strong, you're throwing money away. So you want to build just what the code wants. And of course, the odds of getting that, if that's your focal point, you're going to be below that, right? It's like if 70% is passing and you're taking a test, do you study for a 70? And if you get a 71, you go, darn, I overstudied for this. You know, you should have had a 70. That's your goal to pass. Well, hopefully you don't do that and you study to get above a 70. But in the building community, it's just not happening. So if their house is geared for 70, that's what they want. But unfortunately, because of workmanship and problems with not understanding connections, their houses fail at a lot lower wind speeds. And even 200 in most instances is way too high for a wind speed to knock down a house. Houses can be knocked down at much lower wind speeds. And we'll go into a little bit of that here in a moment. So this is a subjective scale, okay? We know that because different people can look at this and go out and evaluate it. And somebody comes up with an EF2, somebody comes up with EF3. You know, it's like there's going to be a difference here. We know that. But we're using the concept of wind speed damage correlation. And the old F scale was based off of 12 increments between Mach 1 and Beaufort 12. That's how Fujita just connected the line, divided it in 12 for empirical reasons, and there you go. So what we want to do is go out there, look at critical connections and estimate basically what wind speed it took to knock the building down or do the damage to the building. So it is subjective. Errors can be substantial, especially if people don't know what to recognize. What is a fatal flaw of a building? And it's certainly going to be much more complicated. The original EF scale document was like 70 to 90 pages. The new EF scale document I'm working on now, that'll be out hopefully in 2025 or 26, will be 500 pages. Okay, it's going to be huge. And it's going to be complex, and it's going to be up to the National Weather Service to adopt it and then have training materials to train their people on how to evaluate damage, because they're the ones that are going to use this a lot. So how do we address the fatal flaws? How are we going to recognize that? That's a big key here. And then what happens if a tornado doesn't hit anything? What happens if it's out in the open country? Well, we are going to add irrigation systems to the new EF scale because we've gotten a lot of research on that. But there's still questions about vegetation and whether the road pavement has been scoured. How do we come up with a wind speed for that? We're not going to be able to do that on this iteration. In the meantime, other countries haven't waited for us, and they've started to do their own thing. Canada has their own EF scale. So does Japan. In Europe, they have their own F scale. And in the UK, they use a Toro scale. So the international community has gone ahead and come up with their own ways of doing things. Well, hopefully we can try to work things out so that we can all get together on one page here. And then this is a work in progress. We know there's going to be other things that are going to happen in the future. And we're going to have meetings in the future, although I'm going to end my tenure once I am done with this project. It's going to be up to some other person to deal with it. Maybe one of you can take it over. It's going to be a job to continue with the CF scale. So 2015, ASCE, American Society of Civil Engineers Development Committee. I was asked once again to become part of this. And I said yes. And I didn't think it was going to be that much. I thought, okay, we do a little bit of tweaking here and we're done. And then mission creep set in, and they asked me to write a commentary, to add photos, to do research on incorporating other damage surveys into the new enhanced Fujita scale, if you will. So that turned out to be a much bigger project. Also, we're going to add irrigation systems, grain bins, vehicles, churches, and the like. And the draft, this is as of 2021. Obviously, time is of the essence here, and we're moving along. Years fly by, as you know. But if you compare what the old EF scale, we call it the old EF scale, is with the new one, yeah, we have a lot more bullet points in the new one here going. This is for residences. And we have a much more detailed table on how to use this, similar to the old table I showed you a few minutes ago, but here much more detail in it. The wind speeds are pretty much the same. In this case, we have lower resistance column on the left, and then the middle one is the expected one. And then the one on the right is higher yet for upper bound. And then there's a commentary, which is brand new. I wrote these commentaries for the most part, and adding my photos in there for the damage surveys I've done. I've done over 100 tornado and hurricane damage surveys. So I have thousands and thousands and thousands of photos, and therefore you're going to see a lot. You're going to see a lot of it. Then we look at differences in construction. And these come from out of Moore, Oklahoma, which, as you know, has been hit by many major tornadoes. The standard house that's built is on the left. They use a green board, which is a cardboard that is going around, and then there's going to be brick here. Now, this is not very good. The brick is a veneer. It's not, doesn't serve any load purpose. The green board that you see is not any structural purpose. It's more for insulative ability. Whereas the home on the right is solidly sheathed with oriented strand board. And now it locks that everything with the box. It locks the top of the wall with the bottom as a box, and it's a stronger house. Now, you're not going to know that if it's covered up by brick. They'd both look the same. But yet the one on the right would be a stronger house to wind. Now, what is the code? We talked about the minimum code. In Western Illinois, the code currently is at 115 for an ultimate, which is about a 90 mile per hour, 3-second gust. Well, 90 miles an hour doesn't sound like a whole lot, and it isn't. I mean, some derechos have higher winds than, right? 90 isn't really a very strong tornado. It's a fairly weak tornado. 90 is, for a hurricane, is a pretty low end hurricane. So that's the minimum. That's the code. That's what builders are going for. And obviously, if they're going to go for that as a target, they're going to miss it more often than not. So homes aren't going to be built very well. We know that. Just here's engineering 101 for you. This is a cross section on the left of a wall where it meets a concrete slab foundation. Now, I know a lot of you probably don't have concrete slab foundations. You probably have a basement or a crawl space, and you have some maybe stacked block. Well, that's a little more complex. They have these kinds of houses here in Texas. My house is on a slab. Now, what I got in red here are the connections. So the inverted T's you see here are nails that are driven through the bottom plate. There's a bottom plate, then a stud, a wall stud. So that's straight nail. And then there's bolted down to the slab. And that bolt has three things to it. It's got the J bolt, it's got a washer, and it's got a nut. And the nut's got to be properly seated over the washer on the plate. But you can see that there's some critical failure connections here, and that's what I have with F, failures. And when you straight nail it like that, it's okay for the weight of the wall being down to the foundation. But if you go up with wind, it's going to pull right out of those nails. And that's a weak link, and that's where houses typically fail. And we see this failure time and time again. And to make matters worse, we have some municipalities say, well, this is a difficult connection to do because you got two trades involved. You got the person who pours the slab, which is different than the person who frames the house. And so they don't normally talk with each other. And so how do you know where the bolts are going to go? So sometimes you use a strap or a shot pin or even a cut nail to go ahead and attach the bottom plate, which is what's called a variance. And some municipalities say it's a shot pin is where you just load a special gun and you go ahead and you shoot, boom, down right through. Well, it's like a nail going through it, spalls off the concrete, doesn't really seat very well. But that's, unfortunately, that's what's done. So here we have on the left, a normal connection, which is a stud that's actually towed to the bottom plate, and it has a shot pin with a square washer in it, attaching it down to the concrete foundation. But on the right, we have an above normal connection, which involves an actual tie that grabs the stud, the steel tie, and the fasteners are driven in horizontally so that now you're dealing with trying to shear the fastener instead of just pulling it out. Much stronger connection, see? Connections in shear, much stronger than a connection in tension. And the same goes for the roof. Here on the left, typical toe-nailed rafter into the wall top plate, and the top plate's doubled for the weight of the roof. But on the right, you've heard the hurricane strap, but metal straps indeed can be done. And again, they are horizontal and these are screwed in. Screws are stronger than nails. And you're trying to shear this connection, tear that plate or pull out those fasteners from a shearing perspective, and much, much stronger connection. So when you get to a house like this, and trying to evaluate that using the old EF scale now, we see that a roof is gone for the most part. If you use the old EF scale, you scroll down, it says, let's say DOD 4, uplift of roof deck, loss of significant roof covering material, that's greater than 20%. Yeah. Collapse of the chimney, well, the chimney's still good, but that's okay. Garage doors, well, you can't see the garage here, but that is pretty close. The could be 4 or it could be 6. Large section of the roof structure removed. Most walls remain standing. So maybe somewhere between 4 and 6 for an expected value. And that's what we do. We go ahead and use that somewhere between 4 and 6. The next one here, we have much more severe damage to the house is completely collapsed. There's hardly a wall left standing, but we've noticed that here at the edge of the house that it was actually nailed. The wall plates were nailed in the low insets there on the lower left and lower right. You see the little divot. If you've ever pulled up carpet from a floor, sometimes you have these little divots, and that's what this is here on the right. Is a divot in the concrete, just a clear cover coming off. Well, this is horrible construction. I don't know how anything like this passes in the city, but it does. So in this case, where you'd have all walls down, number 9, you'd have to use a lower bound here, or the LB. That's the value you would use. It's not a well-built house. So recognizing the fatal flaw in a house could actually reduce its wind resistance, and that's what it does here. And you can look around, you see, well, there's trees around, there's other houses around. This house looked like it just got picked on. Well, it just didn't take a lot of wind to knock this house down. And that's the problem with some of the old assessments, that they don't consider the construction. And you have to look at the construction. And here's another slider here. Well, was this house anchored down? No, it was not anchored down. Look at the blocks it was set on. And now, unfortunately, there's a lot of houses in Illinois that are just sitting on blocks like this, and they're not anchored at all. So they will just slide right off. And that's why we have DOD 5 in here, entire house shifts off foundation, is because that's for so many houses that we see. Sometimes a third of the houses that we see are what we call sliders. Now, I'm from Chicago. I used to eat White Castle hamburgers all the time. We used to call them sliders, but it's like there's the same for the for houses here, without the onion, of course. And so now you have this as being a real problem. Substandard construction is what this is. You see, the roof is gone, so that could give you another point. You can say, okay, we have the roof is gone, so how was that attached, if at all? And then manufactured homes. These are steel carriages or undercarriages that are really supporting a wood box. They are minimally anchored or sometimes not anchored. You've heard a lot about how these things roll, tumble at fairly low wind speeds. The one on the left there, look at the mailbox is still there. The one on the right flipped over. The wheels had been removed prior to when they installed it. And then they sitting on blocks is all it was. So what is the wind requirement for manufactured housing? Believe it or not, it's usually lower than a wood frame house in terms of the code. This is actually a HUD map, which is the Housing and Urban Development here. And it says they need to be anchored, but you know, how do you go about anchoring it? Well, if you look at the right, you should have what's called an auger anchor, and that depends on the soil conditions, and you got to be able to do that properly by strapping it. And the one on the top is where you just have the frame anchored, where the one on the bottom is you have the frame and you have a strap going over the home anchoring it. But there's 3 zones. The zone 1, which is in Illinois, is minimal anchorage. But again, where do we get the most of our tornadoes? Where do we get the most of the derechos? We get them here in the center of the country. They do have higher requirements in terms of anchoring for the coast because of hurricanes. So that's interesting, because somehow tornadoes and derechos are not a threat, but yet hurricanes are. That doesn't make any sense. But from a standpoint of what they think about in the code, it's like, well, the odds of getting hit with a tornado or a derecho are pretty small compared to getting hit with a hurricane. Well, that may be true, but if you're the person that got hit, I mean, you certainly would want something more than minimal attachments. So there's different kinds of attachments. The one I'm going to talk about here is an auger anchor, which goes on down every 4 to 6 feet. And there's a stabilizing plate that it rests up against. And the detail on the left shows you the frame and the over the top tie. And the one on the right shows you the different kinds of rods that are used depending on your soil depth. Now, what happens if you're in rock? Well, then you got to use a rock anchor. And it's a totally different anchor than it is for soil. And it just shows here how you're supposed to install the anchor. Goes down, you have a plate, so it bears up against the plate like so. And then you got to test for soil conditions, depending on how long your anchor is in 1, 2, 3, 4A or 4B type soils. And it shows you here how to attach and make that strap tight. And the buckle that goes around the I-beam underneath the home here to make sure that that is also attached. Now, when I'm looking at destruction, obviously this looks like a mess. And it is. But what I'm paying attention to are these little details, such as what's circled up here in the upper left. All right. Looking at that, I know immediately that this is the wrong kind of anchor that's used. It's not an auger anchor, and this is soil. It's what's called a rock anchor. A rock anchor is not allowed to be used in soil. It's supposed to be used in rock. That's why they call it a rock anchor. But I immediately noticed that. And here is what it looks like. I'm holding it on the right here. You can see what the rock anchor looks like. It is basically a dowel with two tubular steel diagonals here, and they simply throw a rod through those two in the soil, which is supposed to be in rock, and this was not rock. And of course, it pulled right out. It didn't really anchor this home. And one of the things that happens is when part of the house begins to come apart, the strap breaks. It's a real flimsy strap, and we can see that here. And of course, it's galvanized steel, but that doesn't mean that it's not going to rust, and it typically will rust and eventually corrode away. And I looked at a number of these in Florida, and they corrode away in 10 to 20 years. Okay. So going back to the EF scale, looking at this, we see that this manufactured home has a steel undercarriage, but it's not on blocks. Well, it fell off the blocks. It also has some roof damage. So if you look down the degree of damage there, you've got the unit slides off block piers but remains upright. That's DOD 3, see. And DOD 4 is complete uplift of the roof. Most walls remain standing. Well, it's been uplifted some, but not complete. So somewhere between 3 and 4 DOD. And this is normal expected EXP construction, what you would expect to be a failure wind speed there. So that's how we would apply the EF scale to manufactured homes. Now, if you go out to one of these big box buildings like a Walmart, a Kmart, Home Depot, Menards, whatever, a lot of times they're built of either concrete masonry units or a precast tilt-up wall. And so tornadoes hit those and damage those pretty well. And we have to have a different DI for that because it's a totally different kind of building. And you can see the types of damages here. This was from Dallas, Texas. I looked at this Home Depot here. It had a few wall panels down. The front end of it buckled in where they had a weaker wall. And you can see pretty extensive damage here. Here's a ground view of it. Interestingly, things that are not damaged are just as important as things that are. And here we have a high tension line tower that wasn't damaged, but the building is damaged. So that's interesting. Large isolated retail buildings, what we call it. If you look down on the degree of damage, you can see that, uplift of some roof decking, significant loss of roofing material, long roof spans collapse downward, uplift and removal of roof structure. We don't indicate percentages here, but we will in the new enhanced Fujita scale. So somewhere between expected wind speeds of 103, which is DOD 3, and DOD 5, which is 134. But we also know that these towers for electrical transmission are designed for 120. So we can figure, well, that's staged, so it's probably a little less than 120, probably somewhere between 103 and 120. Now we're looking at large isolated retail building in Joplin, Missouri. And this was complete collapse, except for one little corner where people were seeking shelter from the tornado. The whole roof structure is gone. And unfortunately, there were several fatalities in this thing because a lot of people didn't get to shelter in time. So complete destruction of all or large section of the building. That's true. Inward or outward collapse of exterior walls. That's also true. But we decided it was up there probably in the 173 due to just the extent of the destruction, where the wall panels are say 85% down and the entire roof structure is gone. It's actually was deposited in a field next door. This is a school I looked at in Dallas, Texas. It was in an area that didn't have a whole lot of damage, and I'm wondering what went on here. These are an exterior wall that fell out. What happened was a wind got in on the other side from a broken window and then pressurized the building, and then the wall fell out. So I'm really curious about the attachment, if any. Well, the base of the wall was a steel channel stud, and it was nailed into the slab, which was not bolted. Wasn't bolted. It was nailed. And you can see on the right the little divots there in the concrete. Horrible construction. How did this? And this is in the Dallas area. How does this get through a building inspector? That's just amazing how that happened. And there's the divot there. Well, because of this fatal flaw of the wall there, we decided that, still fairly low wind speed, DOD 5. More intense damage to this school in Dallas, although the basketball stops did quite well. Usually those things are bent over, but here, this is an older school, kind of school I had gone to when I was a young punk, and it had a large array of windows that failed. And when you get windward wall failures like that, then it just pressurizes and uplifts the roof. Okay. And that's exactly, you can see how it just pushed in the windows there, the wind did. So I went ahead and figured uplift or collapse of the roof structure, DOD 7, expected value there of the wind speed. A more modern low-story building, it's an office building here in the Dallas area that was hit. I lost all of its windows, and again, when that happens, then you lose part of the roof. And using the low-rise building, 1 to 4 stories, DI, we came up with DOD 5 uplift of the lightweight roof structure, 133. Although it's probably a little lower because I'm looking at the trees that weren't so badly damaged there. The high rises also get hit, and I've looked at several of them in my time. Here we can see that the end walls here that are circled are all gone. This was actually a travertine stone that was attached to the frame, and it's gone. The windows are gone too, and then blew off part of the roof. When looking at this, I found out the travertine was held on with little twisty tie wire onto rebar. That's what this is showing you. That's right. Remember all the twisty ties? You use that for bread and things. Well, they use it, unfortunately, for attaching stone to the building. Looking at the mid-rise buildings that are damaged, and we've seen them, 129 to 136 is the failure there. And yes, some of the big boys, these are high rises that have been damaged by tornadoes. They're not immune. But the nice thing about a high rise is that they're engineered so that the frame stays. Well, the cladding, which is just a window dressing around the perimeter, which is just an array of windows, well, windows break. And usually it's because there's debris flying around, and that breaks windows, believe it or not, right? Rocks break glass. Wow. So we look at this and we see, for high rises greater than 20 stories, as this was, what DOD and wind speed are we going to be assigning here? And we went ahead with broken glass in entryways, 101, significant, damage here to the perimeter. And then something like a metal building, this building failed in Hurricane Laura, at least part of it did. And we looked at the reason for the failure on the right. It's because the studs were corroded. It rains and they got lots of salt there on the coast, and it was destroyed there and just fell right on out. Once again, looking at those fatal flaw connections, on the left is the wall laying in the parking lot. On the right are little tiny nails that are driven into the slab. That was it. That's all you got into the slab. So not very good there. They're looking at a really poor application here. Now, we have a lot of non-DIs currently. We're working on this to try to add some of these, but it's difficult because vehicles come in various sizes and shapes and weights, and it makes a real difference which angle of attack of the wind. We've seen videos of vehicles being thrown up in the air, and it's like, what kind of wind speeds do these, and does this damage? So it's like, we're working on it. We find that there's a wide range of wind speeds that cause vehicles to loft. Certainly in the Dallas tornado, as these vehicles were, they were moved a little bit. The number of lofted vehicles was small, but we saw lots of movement of vehicles like that. And then sometimes we come across some funny things. There's a casino nearby called Windstar, and their slogan is "Give it a whirl." And you know what? The tornado did that. It gave it a whirl. It twisted this thing about 45 degrees and moved it about 16 inches off its base. So, be careful what you wish for. So, but we don't have billboards in the EF scale, although we do find funny things from every once in a while. We think about, gosh, how are we going to rate that? Well, fortunately, there's other things around it that we could rate that were buildings there. And some unusual things, the mattress in the tree. Yeah, you've heard about that. Yeah, I've seen plenty of those. Mattresses like to cling on to trees. And then on the right, some unusual one. This was a box car storage unit that was full of desks from the school, and it was lofted up and deposited on somebody's roof. So imagine, what it would take to lift that and loft that. So you could probably do a calculation of that to indicate what it would take to lift this thing up. But that's pretty amazing stuff that we've seen out there. So anyways, this kind of gives you a little bit of a run through about the enhanced Fujita scale, what we're working on, still a work in progress. That shows you how we use it. The National Weather Service folks, how they use it. They take their job very seriously. When they go out and a tornado happens, they map it out. They're interested in knowing the path length, the path width, and the overall intensity of the tornado. And that's what their job is. And they have what's called a damage assessment toolkit, which is available online. You can look at it. It's a wonderful history. And the neat thing about the damage assessment toolkit is not only do they pinpoint areas of the DIs and their degree of damage, but they actually have pictures in there that you can actually see what they're looking at. So it's a great training tool too. And there's also training, EF scale training online. The National Weather Service, in conjunction with NOAA, has a training modules available online. You can learn a lot more about that in terms of the EF scale. This is what the future is holding right now. I think 2025, maybe 2026, you'll see a brand new publication come out, very thick, 500 page or so, on the enhanced Fujita scale version. This will actually be version 3, believe it or not. So anyways, that's my talk for tonight. And if you have any questions, I'll be more than happy to try to answer them.
We have time for questions, so if anyone wants to.
All right. So for single or two family homes, a lot of the earlier damage assessment stages rely a lot on the state that the roof is in. But how does wind damage against a roof change depending on the angle of the roofing? Like I've seen roofs with only 10 angles. I have a friend who is practically like 45 degree. Is that factored in at all, or is it enough to matter?
It does matter. And in fact, if you notice, a lot of the homes that are built near the coast are what they call hip style roofs, which are low slope roofs that have intersections on 4 planes. And yeah, so roofs are more streamlined down near the coast because they want roofs to stay there. So as you know, in the Midwest, we have roofs of all kinds. We have the very steep gable roofs like that. Those are not very good at all in terms of wind resistance. Plus, they're just simply toenailed the rafter down to the top plate. So it's a minimal connection. And so, yes, it's something that should be considered in. And that's why you're going to see a lot of houses with no roof. And if you see a house with no roof, it means there was a widespread problem there with connecting that rafter down to the top plate.
Anyone else have a question?
I was gonna say, so if you have the Fujita scale and then the enhanced Fujita scale, what, are you gonna name this next scale something else? Or is it gonna be,
Now it's just the another enhanced Fujita scale, but this will be version 3.
E3? Okay.
E squared.
There you go.
Anyone
I
else?
have a question.
Go ahead.
So 500 pages, that's gonna require quite a bit of human resources to be able to implement. Do you foresee this ever becoming automated with drones, and is this something that could be fed into AI training?
Yes, in fact, the future is going to be such that you'll have an app on your phone. You'll be able to go ahead and say, okay, we have a residence here. I'll take a few pictures of it. Have a residence here. It looks like it's DoD 3, and I can slide a scale back and forth. You may have some AI saying, based upon your picture and what you type in what the connections were, this is what I would suggest. I mean, you may have an AI program that will be in there. Use of drones is definitely a thing that's happening. I've used them in damage surveys. They're really essential because there's no way I'm going to be able to get up there and see how that roof wall connection was done most of the time. So unless and I do bring a ladder with me occasionally, and I go up there and look at it. But it's like drones are much easier. You just pop a drone out. You can do several buildings at once. You go ahead and look at their connections at the roof wall connection, and then put that into your little tablet. So right now, the National Weather Service has what they call a damage assessment toolkit, and I've been out with them, working with them on it, and they have an app on their phone now. It's not available to the public, but it's something that they use, and they're able to do it now. But they don't have the AI yet, and they don't have a way of incorporating a drone or something into that yet. But I think the future will have that.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Anyone online have any questions? No? All right. Well, thank you, Tim. I really appreciate you coming out.
Oh, you bet. Absolutely. All right, y'all have a good one.
You too. Thank you.
If you guys didn't get signed in, please make sure you sign it on the board just so we can keep track of everybody. We erase that.
The recording.